Shabbat Shalom, and this is 10 Minutes of Torah. Not the 10 plagues, although it kind of is, actually, and not the 10 commandments, that's going to be in 2 weeks, but 10 Minutes of Torah. Well, this week's Torah portion is called Bo. It's the shortest name for, there we are, the Chumash, to show you that we are looking at the Torah portion. It is the shortest name for a Torah portion, just 2 letters. And interestingly, the first 2 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, although reversed, Bo, Bet, and Aleph. And it continues with the last of the 10 plagues. You see, I said it is kind of about the 10 plagues. It is about the 10 plagues. And those 3 plagues are locusts, darkness, and of course, makat bechorot, the death of the firstborn. Now, these 3 plagues have been separated from the other plagues, and it's interesting because there is clearly a literary style, if you will, to the presentation of the plagues. That is, they come in 3s. First one, Moses and Aaron see Pharaoh by the water. The second one they give a warning to. The third one, no warning. So while 8, 9, and 10 are also a grouping, 7, 8, and 9 form their own group. So why do we have 8, 9, and 10 together if we have these 3 series of 3 plagues? Why do we go with 8, 9, and 10 this week? And the answer is they too have something in common. They all involve a real sense of darkness. Locusts. Well, thankfully, because I'm not an insect kind of person who is, but I have heard that a real plague of locusts would make the sky black. And of course, darkness is darkness. And the death of the firstborn, you couldn't ask for a greater darkness than that. But to show that there is a difference between the first 9 plagues and the 10th, the Torah makes a break after the 9th plague. After the 9th plague, we get the commandment which we are all familiar with of how the Israelites observed the very first Pesach as they were leaving Egypt. And the Torah tells us in chapter 12, verses 11 to 13, it says that they're to take a lamb, becomes a part of the Passover meal later on, but something unique to this time in Egypt, take the blood and put it on the mezuzah. Doesn't mean your mezuzah, actually means the doorpost. Put the blood there. You should eat it hurriedly. Of course, that will ultimately mean matzah, because we don't have time for the bread to rise, though that happens at the end of the Torah portion. And God says, I will go through the land of Egypt. When I see the blood on the house where you are staying, I will pass over you, so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Now, for another time, we could discuss the relationship between the blood on the doorpost and the mezuzah we have today. It's an interesting question. But this observance was unique to the very first Pesach. We call it Pesach Mitzrayim, the very first Pesach that occurs. Well, after this description of what they should do, then we get the last plague, makat bechorot, the death of the firstborn. And at this point, Pharaoh is so filled with anxiety and fear and awe of God, he sends the people out. And we flee. And we take with us dough, which has no time to rise. Finally, the Torah portion concludes with how we are to observe Pesach throughout the generations. And of course, while it doesn't talk about the Seder, it does talk about the Passover sacrifice, about eating matzah. So now we are really ready to leave Egypt and ready to commemorate it throughout the generations. Now, I would like to think today and talk and question that last plague, Makat Bechorot, the death of the firstborn. Over the years, the death of the firstborn has gone from simply one of the recitations of the plagues, Dam, Svardeya, Kinim, with our fingers there, has gone from simply mentioning it to something that is very troubling to me. How is it that the God that we worship, a God who actually later on is described as El Rachum V'Chanun, a God of kindness and mercy, how is it that this God strikes the firstborn of Egypt? Well, first of all, we have to understand the Torah in its literary context, not just its religious context. That is to say, the Torah is a very, very sophisticated literary work where you have foreshadowing, where you have word usage that brings you back to other things that have occurred. And in the case of the 10th plague, it is a reminder that there is retribution, if you will. There is action and reaction. Pharaoh, you recall, first said that all the males that are born should be killed and thrown into the Nile River. So now God says, that was your decree, Pharaoh. You wanted to make a decree against my firstborn, that is the people of Israel. So I will decree against yours. So from a literary sense, we can see that the punishment for Pharaoh's attempt of genocide is to have the firstborn die. But on a sense of what God will come to mean in Judaism, it's troubling. And yet, the rabbis took us in what I would say is the proper direction when it came to understanding this moment and the nature of God. You see, to begin with, next week, when we have Shirat Hayam, the great poem and prayer and song that celebrates our freedom, there's a beautiful midrash by the rabbis, long after the Torah, but a beautiful midrash by the rabbis, which depicts the angels on high singing along with the people of Israel, singing words of praise to God, having defeated the army of Pharaoh, having the Red Sea, or the Sea of Reeds, close in on the army. And they are singing joyfully, the angels in heaven. And the midrash has God rebuking them. God says to them, my children are dying. How can you sing words of praise? Fascinating that the original idea of a consequence for an action, death of male Israelites, will result in the death of the firstborn of the Egyptians. The rabbis, instead of taking it in a more, military context, said, no, this is a God that we worship, whose attributes indeed are kindness and mercy. And we're going to add our thoughts about that direction through the Midrash, but not just through the Midrash. You remember I said, Dam, Svardeya, right? What do we do that for? Why do we take our pinky, whatever finger you want to use, or spoon, take from the wine at the Seder as we recite the plagues? It is to decrease our joy. We should get no joy from the troubles of our enemies. Yes, we have enemies. Yes, we have to fight them. But we should get no joy from them. As a matter of fact, in the same way, one of the most beautiful statements by any Jew, but certainly by a prime minister of Israel, was made by Golda Meir. She said at one point to the leaders of the Arab world, we can forgive you for killing our boys. In those days, at that time, only men were really fighting. We can forgive you for killing our boys, but we can never forgive you, Golda said, for making us kill yours. The idea that we receive no joy in the death of our enemies. Yes, it can be necessary. Yes, there are evil forces out there. We don't receive joy in it. And so we come from the death of the firstborn, but that takes us to the God who is indeed kind and merciful, the kind of God that we can worship. I want to mention that we continue to see hostages returned alive, and what a great blessing that is, and we want to be thankful for that. With that, I simply want to say that this has been 10 Minutes of Torah, not 10 plagues. Well, it was 10 plagues, but not the 10 commandments. 2 weeks from now, Shabbat Shalom.